Welcome to Through Jeremiah's Eyes. Today, we're going into the veterinary odyssey again while we're in Gabon, Africa. Now, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of health checks, doing some stuff with drawing blood, as well as checking for tuberculosis, as well as performing some ultrasounds on the chimps. They have a lot of parasites just from the foods that they eat and the environments that they're in within the national park. So, there's a lot of cysts that they have on their livers, in their intestines, and even on some of the female chimpanzees' uterus. So, we had to go in there, get the ultrasound, and be able to start doing some health checks on them. While we were doing these health checks, though, there were a ton of different conversations that were happening about not only the anatomy and the different anatomy of a chimpanzee as compared to most of our small animals like dogs and cats, but also just the nature of the chimpanzees. All of them have such different personalities, and when we were interacting with them, some of them would even trade different items. Like if I had some food, they would point at the food and they would go and get something to try and exchange with me for it. Or if I wanted to get a stick, there was some sort of like hand movement that I would do or like point at the stick, and they would actually understand that I'm trying to get the stick and they would hand it to me. And it's just little pieces of information like that that let me know that they're able to understand things on a different level than most animals, and it may just be because we're so much alike and our lives are very similar. But it blew my mind how we were able to communicate like that. Now, back on the rim of health checks, one of the things that we were doing were some bronchoalveolar lavages. We essentially insert a tube into their trachea and into their lungs, put some fluid in it, and then we suck it back up with a syringe. And when we do that, we're able to then take that sample and look at it under a microscope and culture it to see what sort of bacteria or things are actually in the chimpanzee's lungs. Because if they have pneumonia or something like that that's causing some sort of lower respiratory problem, we need to know what we should be using to treat it. We can't just throw anything out at it. We have to be specific with what we're doing so that we are good stewards of antimicrobials. But back on the topic of the parasites, there's been researchers and scientists in Gabon that have noticed that chimpanzees usually take the same exact route no matter what with their group when they're trying to travel from point A to point B. But lately, there have been chimpanzees that have been sick, most likely with parasites, and they end up taking different routes. And those different routes have different plants, they have different vegetation, just different things in general. And when we tie that back to the Gabonese culture, there is a lot of natural medicine and natural remedies that are used to treat people's ailments and illnesses. And one of the things that the scientists have found is that the fecal samples before the chimpanzees deviate to somewhere that's not on their usual route, the fecal samples have more parasites in them than the ones that deviated towards different sorts of vegetation. And it probably is because they found some sort of natural remedy. So, some of the things, and one of the things that I feel like would be really cool to do, hopefully, an upcoming research project, is to see if we can find the fecal samples and then analyze the fecal samples and identify the actual plant DNA within those samples to be able to see what natural remedies are out there that the chimpanzees are using. And I'm sure this happens. I'd I'd be down to put money on it that this actually does happen, but proving it in a scientific way definitely is, I feel like, going to be difficult, and I also don't think that chimpanzees are the only animals that do that. Nonetheless, it seems like it would be very, very cool to do. Like, insanely cool to do. And hopefully, the uptick of ecotourism within the country allows for more things like this to get started. Different research projects, different science projects, especially ones that are non invasive to the animals. It would make a lot of sense for different camera traps to be set up, for different fecal analysis to be ran, just to be able to understand the wildlife even more and be able to understand the impact that humans are having on the nature while the country as a whole is trying to incorporate more ecotourism into it. Because if we're benefiting from nature through being able to generate money based off of it, there is a level of protection that I believe nature should have in us giving back to nature. And that's because when people think about chimpanzees, I think a lot of us picture dense rainforests, thick canopies, vines all over everywhere for them to sing from, and that's it. But being here in Gabon genuinely reshaped how I think about where chimps live and how their survival is tied to the land as a whole, not just one ecosystem or like one isolated area, because Gabon is a rainforest, it's a savanna. There are wetlands, rivers, coastlines, all layered on top of each other. And the wild part is how quickly those transitions happen. You can be standing in tall grass in the savannah, walk a little bit, and suddenly you're under a closed canopy with completely different sounds, humidity, and life around you. And the chimpanzees out there move through absolutely all of that. Like their lives aren't combined or confined to one postcard version of nature. They really depend on the overlap of all these different climates, essentially. And that overlap matters a ton. They rely on fruiting trees that come and go seasonally, and those trees don't all exist in one place year round. So they gotta move, they gotta forage, they gotta adapt. And when you protect large connected landscapes like this, instead of just having isolated pockets of protection, you give them the flexibility to do that naturally. And that's one of the biggest things that Gabon gets right. The land isn't just chopped up into tiny fragments. There's space for these buffaloes to move, there's space for the chimpanzees to thrive, and space for wild animals to be truly wild. And that space changes the behavior. You see it in how the chimps socialize, how they feed, and how even all the animals respond to humans. In areas where the land is heavily fragmented, chimpanzees are forced into closer contact with people, farms, and roads, and that's where the conflict starts. That's where disease transmission becomes more likely. That's where the stress gets increased. But here, because the ecosystems are still intact, they aren't constantly being pushed into survival mode. They're allowed to exist on their own terms. And the savanna, even though it isn't full of trees, does play a role in that too. It's a part of the entire ecosystem too. Certain foods, certain insects, and certain travel corridors that are safe for them exist there. And chimpanzees will move along the forest edges, cross open areas strategically, and use different habitats at different times because they all have different purposes. And that adaptability is one of their like biggest strengths. But it's only possible if their environment still gives them options. And what really continues to hit me over and over again is realizing how intentional Gabon has been about practicing the whole picture. Not just animals, but also the land and water too. When you hear that a huge protection of the country is protected, it sounds very impressive on paper, but when you're actually there, driving through it, walking through it, hearing it, feeling it, you understand what that protection actually translates into. Like being able to hear all the birds, you see less fear in animals. You just feel like you're in a place that hasn't been completely bent around by human convenience, whether it's medically, behaviorally, or socially. all that all that matters on every single level. And when it comes to the veterinary conservation side of everything, being able to treat parasites and run blood work is, of course, interesting. But another big thing is the stress levels, the nutrition, whether the chimps can move naturally through their environments or if they're just going to be boxed in over and over again. But the rainforest that you're seeing and the savanna that you're seeing come together to be able to create a balance that supports all of it that they like. But there is a human side of it too. Like conservation doesn't exist in a vacuum. People live here, people rely on the land. There are people that live exclusively in the rainforest. And Gabon seems to recognize that long-term protection only works if all the ecosystems stay functional and they're not just blocked off. When the land stays healthy, the animals are healthier, which leads to less disease transmission to humans, and people have more options that don't rely on just tearing down the habitats and destroying all the land at the end of the day. So, as I was standing in these ecosystems and thinking about chimpanzees specifically, it made me realize that we got to maintain our relationships between the forest and savannah, but also between us and animals, the animals in the land, and even just human to human, country to country. Because if one of us ends up falling short, everybody ends up feeling it. And that's why I believe chimps are such a powerful lens for understanding this place. They're super intelligent, social, adaptable, and deeply connected to the environment, and they reflect the health of the system that they live in. If the chimps are thriving, it usually means that the land is doing something right. So, regardless of how fragile it is strong at the end of the day. Gabon to me feels like a reminder of what's possible when ecosystems are respected early on and not just we're fighting to repair them later. And for chimpanzees, that difference could mean everything.